It's Emily Talerman here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a debate tactic I'm going to call very emotional language. Now, as I teach you about this tactic, I will be referencing a real-life debate where I use this tactic along with my partner Taseen Hussain. For reference, the resolution in this debate was physical education should be replaced with life skills and job training. Now, we were on the negation for this, and during this time when I asked a question, our opposition was saying something to the effect of that PE is redundant because if obese children wanted to exercise, they would on their own time. In which case, I stood up and asked, are you victim blaming obese children? Now, there are two ways that you can use this tactic. One is a POI and the other in a response, and that was an example of when I used it as a POI. Now, here are the benefits of standing up and asking a question with very emotional language. Asking this type of question can interrupt the opposition. Because let's face it, you've gone against those teams, or you will go against those teams that are really good. They're just better than you. They're on a roll. The judge is eating up their every word. What they're saying is the butter to the judge's bread. It's going so well for them. And you know that if they keep talking, the judge is going to be siding with them. You need to find a way to throw a wrench in their speaking to make sure that judge doesn't forget about you. What do? That wrench, in this case, is a very emotional question. Now, the other reason this works is that you are awakening the judge. Because let's face it, everyone's dead tired at these tournaments all day. They start so early and so late, and it takes so long to get to them and get home. Your judge is asleep. They're falling asleep. They're thinking about what they had for dinner last night. They're thinking about what they're gonna have for dinner. They've been lulled into a state of complacency by the good speaking of the other team, and you need to awaken them. So imagine for a second that you are drifting off into La La Land, just kind of, and suddenly you hear victim blaming obese children. Why, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? And it has to be plausible. That's the other thing about very emotional language. It has to be plausible. In this case, my question about whether or not they were victim blaming obese children was plausible because they were suggesting that it was obese kids' fault for not exercising. So by doing that, you are grabbing their attention. Now, hopefully what happens is you not only throw a wrench in their flow, them being the opposition, you also mess them up for the rest of their speaking time after that. Suddenly, they have to take time to stop what they were saying, listen to you ask a question, which don't ever feel like you need to rush when you ask a question. You're just wasting the other team's time, which is great. Do that, especially if they're really good. You want to take away their time as much as possible. So don't ever feel like you have to speak really quickly. Even though I tend to speak quickly naturally, it's something I need to be more mindful about, and I am mindful about it when I debate, but it's always something to consider when you're asking a question. There's no rush. Take your time. Make sure that the judge understands that question. And it also means that the other team's probably going to be frustrated that you're not blah, 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 a question, that you're taking a time to say, hey, are you victim blaming obese children? See? Eloquently spoken, didn't need to rush. Now, not only have you wasted their time by asking a question, now they have to waste their time by responding. And the reason that your question has to be plausible, because if it's too ridiculous, they can just say, well, that's ridiculous, and go back to whatever it is they were talking about before. You need your question to be plausible and emotional. That way they have to take time to respond. Suddenly, you're wasting more of their time on something that they planned not talking about at all. Because in reality, there's a car driving by, your emotional question is obviously related to the debate in that it's plausible, but it's not a speaking point that the other team could have prepared for. So they're now going to have to be thinking up on the fly. Hopefully your opponents are not good at speaking on the fly and that they get tripped up. They stutter, they say, I don't know. The best answer, by the way, if they give you is, I don't know. That's great. You can run with I don't know. Or they give you something unsubstantiated or vague. And either they go back to trying to figure out what they were talking about before you interrupted them with a question, or they just sit down. They yield the rest of their time. Either way, you have wasted their time, thrown them off, and awakened the judge's attention. And hopefully they do sit down, because the less time they're talking means the less time the judge is going to be swayed by them. Now, the other way you can use this tactic is in a response. Now, like I mentioned, if you're asking them, they have to respond to you. Say you go up for your rebuttal, then you can talk about how the other team responded to your question. You can say, wow, when I asked them, are they victim blaming obese children? They said, oh, I don't know. I mean, what kind of answer is that, Judge? You don't know. That's a very unlikely answer to an emotional question, I don't know. But in the case they say that is amazing. That is, for you, it's amazing for you, which is what we want. Or they might say whatever they've said, and you get to go up and say, see, Judge, they said they weren't victim blaming obese children, but look, Judge, they clearly were. And while you were sitting down, you mentally prepared some evidence for how they were victim blaming obese children, and there you are creating more rebuttal about this talking point you created that really isn't actually part of the debate. You created this problem, forced them to deal with it, and now you get to judge how they dealt with it in your response. Now, the other way you can use this as a response is instead of just asking them, waiting for them to respond, and then responding to them, you can just say it in your own speech. You can say, yeah, blah, 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 here are reasons why we should keep PE. In addition, throughout this entire debate, the opposition has been victim blaming obese children. That's terrible. You can use this emotional language as a talking point, which is especially useful when you've run out of things to say. Because that'll happen, especially if you have like an 8-minute speech, you're running out of things to say. Start using emotional language. This is something my partner Tassine does amazing. He uses very emotional language with examples like the founding fathers are turning over in their graves, things that are objectively bad. One time in an environmental debate, I painted a picture of a mother walking by with her child and getting lung cancer because they breathed in some bad dirt or whatever from some environmental landmine practice. You see, that's a time waster. Meanwhile, you're looking at the judge, maintaining eye contact, telling them, oh my gosh, Judge, don't let the other team do something so horrible. It's terrible. See, that's also another time taker. If you ever find yourself in a debate where you just don't know what to say, you can do that. Also, sometimes there are debates that are very clearly sided one way or the other. For example, my partner Tassine and I were given the negation on the resolution, all people are able to rise up out of poverty, which obviously not. It's so much easier to argue the negation for that than the affirmative. But even in debates like that, you still have to have things to say, even though your point is pretty obvious and most of the work is on the other team. So I was able to go up there and paint emotional pictures claiming that the other team is ignoring the hardships poor people face every day, and that late-stage capitalism has ruined millions of Americans just trying their best. See, very emotional language in that case is not only a time taker for you, and it also wastes the other team's time. So it's a very useful tactic. A key thing to note when you're using it as a response is don't let it take too much of your time. Even if you are in what I mentioned are very clearly easy debates for you, you still need to mention your points. Otherwise you might come off as conceited and like you're not prepared. So you have to mention your contentions. You still have to remind your judge of the contentions a few times, regularly bring them up, connect what the very emotional language you're using to those contentions. And of course, even if you're using these in a response, they have to be plausible. So whatever you're saying, it can't be too ridiculous that it makes you look unprepared and the other team can easily pounce on it and say, well, that's not true, it doesn't even make sense. So make sure, no matter what emotional claim you make up, it needs to be plausible. Now I will hold up my notes for you, if you find that helpful, because I know I've been talking for what my clock says, like 9 minutes now. And that doesn't even include the intro. So feel free to pause as I hold these up. All right, well, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of our other previous debaters. And I look forward to seeing y'all out on the debate field.